Welcome to the Hytro Performance Podcast. This time, I am happy to announce that we're with Warren again, founder of Hytro, and we are joined by athlete, coach, extraordinaire of BFR across baseball and so many other sports, Mr. Brian Buck.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to see you, Brian, as always. And thanks, Rich.
Likewise.
So, first question, really, Brian, is can you take us back to your baseball days as an athlete and tell us what that was like transitioning from, pro level athlete to now pro level coaching?
Yeah, good question. Gosh, I look back, I learned so much now. I wish I could do a lot of things differently. So pro level athlete was a young kid that didn't know a lot of how to handle and mature. Drafted out of junior college, I was, I think, 20, 21 years old and forced to be a professional at an early age. So right out of college, and hey, you're gonna be a pro now. So step your game up and show up and work. And no one really teaches you how to handle that as a young kid. You just kind of go and think you can still do a lot of the same things you've been doing and just transfer that. And in a lot of ways you can, but in a lot of ways you got to adapt and improve kind of your routine and how you handle yourself and how you treat your body, because you go from a few games a week to a game a day real quick. And so that load on the body is something that you got to account for. And if you don't change some other things on the back end, you're going to quickly learn. So I wouldn't trade my pro experience for anything. It was a very unsuccessful career in the big picture of it, right? I didn't get to the ultimate goal where I wanted to go. So I have a lot of things that I think about or I would have done differently and whatnot. But the way that it really kind of forced me to be a man at a young age, and the way that I was able to compete against the talent that I was up against kind of brought something out of me that I didn't know existed. So there was a lot of forced growth in a lot of ways. And you are always trying to, and this was me, and by mistake a little bit, and something I've learned about is I was always trying to please the individuals I was working with, whether that be my hitting coach, my strength coach, whoever it was, yes, sir. Like, I'm going to do it the way you asked. Instead of thinking, how am I going to handle this? And is this the best thing for me? Almost to a fault. I'm going to do what I'm told to do and whatnot. And so, long story short, there were some injuries that I battled with along the way because of my inexperience of training and handling that type of volume. And it was a career cut short through, a handful of injuries, and quickly get told that, hey, you're a number. You're that's it. If you can't show up and be healthy every day, we're going to find somebody that can. And so the blunt truth of all that was a hard thing to handle as a young kid, but it honestly pushed me in a direction that I probably needed to go in terms of kind of the next step in the chapter. So to kind of your question, where did I go from there? And so that was an opportunity to view it as a player, what it feels like to be in the trenches and give that effort, right? So then I went back to school from there. I got my kinesiology and business degree at Arizona State at that point. I was still obsessed with the training process because of, I think, a lot of the shortfalls of my own experiences and where I didn't optimize for myself. And so I was like, how do we do this? And I started reading books. I started going to class, and, the kinesiology program is great, but I really started to learn a lot more when I started doing an internship where we were training a bunch of pro athletes, and a lot of them were baseball athletes. And sadly, it looked a lot different than how I was training when I was in the grind. So I learned a lot there, and I really wanted nothing to do with baseball at that point, because I had been in it for so long every day, and it's all I thought about, that I wanted to get away from it. And actually, it didn't have a ton of opportunity towards the end of my undergraduate studies. And my mentor kind of reached out. He's like, hey, this professional baseball team is looking to hire, an intern strength and conditioning coach. Do you want me to get you an interview? Sure. Well, I landed it and I got it, and I ended up getting back into baseball. That experience, so for the next 5 years of my life, was being a strength and conditioning practitioner in Major League Baseball, from the lowest levels of the minor leagues to the highest level in the big leagues. and then ultimately overseeing all of the minor league performance development. So finding coaches, doing the programming piece, all the above. And what really helped me and set me up for success there is that I had been in these guys' shoes before. It wasn't like I was, hey, you guys need to do this, and just kind of shouting from my ivory tower. It was like, hey, here's the demands. Here's where you're not prepared. We got to be better here. And so they knew that I was coming from a place of someone that had been in their shoes before. So there was some immediate credibility in that sense. But it was just very helpful to understand what they were going through and relating to them as a young coach. So, you kind of have a young baseball player and then a young coach. And then from there, because of a number of things, of just quality of life things, I got out of baseball. There was a lot of time and demand in that. And I missed a couple of my good friends' weddings, and that shook me up a little bit. And you just can't get away in the summertime to live your life a lot of times in that game. I don't hate people that stay in it. At that time, I was just like, hey, I kind of want to take advantage of life out there, and I don't want to miss all these things. So I ended up going over and working for Scott Boras, who's probably the most powerful agent in the game of baseball. And I was hired to train his clientele exclusively. And what that next kind of career path really showed me was, I went from player to practitioner to now on the agency side, where I trained guys, yes, in the off season, but the in season was different. Now in season, I wasn't with a team, but I was managing the needs of the individuals and kind of overseeing it. And you really understand the human element of this. So now it's like, okay, training is X's and O's, and we got to execute a number of things to improve or get the adaptations and qualities we're trying to get. But this side of the agency side really taught me the human side of things, and like the needs of humans in general to be happy. Like baseball can be going well, training can be going well, but if other things aren't going well, guys need they need certain things to be happy. So how, from an agency perspective, could we also be involved in that side of it? So it's a very interesting side that I loved, that I thought, I got to know a lot of these guys and making sure that they're happy with, sponsors and people they were working with and companies that they were working with outside of just the X's and O's of what I normally was in, was intriguing to me. But just understanding that we're all humans and we all go through these battles, and no one really kind of knows it from the outside. That was a very interesting kind of chapter for me. And then from there, I went on and I worked in the sports tech industry for about 6 years. That gave me a whole different perspective on kind of the performance industry. And that really taught me, okay, at this point now I'm starting to consult with universities and private facilities and pro teams of all sports. So now it's way outside of baseball. It's not, it's not just baseball, it's every other sport, under the sun, and looking at data and how we can help different groups kind of understand data and understanding how to apply it and all these things. And so I got thrown into the fire of a lot of different examples and scenarios of like how to help small teams kind of simplify their systems and how they can do that. But I think really my main takeaway from there was understanding how to present what can seem like complex information to the proper stakeholders involved, i.e., administration at a university. Why are they getting an ROI on what they're using and what they're spending for data? And is it going into play? And are we seeing an injury reduction? Right? How do the sport coaches understand what the practitioners are doing in the gym, and why does it all make sense with the load of everything else going on? So that kind of role taught me just, again, how are we doing and accomplishing a lot of the same things, but how am I speaking to a different persona and stakeholder to help them understand the whole big picture of it all. So that really was an interesting path from player to now talking with stakeholders. And now I'm in this role of, for a lack of a better term, kind of a high performance concierge service, where a group, myself and others included, we really are the team outside the team. We are taking care of professional athletes at the highest level and providing, physical development and capacity, injury restoration and rehabilitation where needed, technical and skill development, the psychological aspect in any need, And then, getting very deep, underneath the hood in terms of biomarkers and getting blood work done and nutritionists involved and chefs involved to really optimize the whole scenario at the highest level. And I think that my kind of path to this role now has been instrumental in terms of kind of identifying and understanding these different areas of the field and kind of how to, again, balance and nuance the training and the demands of being in the sport with the human side of things, with parents and family and any other stakeholders involved, and the whole picture. My relationship isn't just with the athletes now, it's with agents, it's with coaches, it's with family members. And so it's really like it all kind of came together after kind of all those together, and they all play a part in what I do now. So that's really kind of a long-winded way of answering that question of player to now kind of this performance coaching. It is really a wide lens of X's and O's, but everything outside of that, to happiness, to friends, to family, to agents, etc.
Right. Do you think you'd have had the same career, a similar career, or completely different had you not been an athlete? So the reason I'm asking is because it seems like it was a bit of a cornerstone or foundation of your proving that you're coachable, showing that you learned from that experience, whereby you may have had not the best athletic experience because you got injured, for example, learned from that. Do you think having been an athlete set you on that path to where you are now? Do you think it was
100%? Yeah, 100%. And it's just the obsession with competing, I think. And where did things go wrong? And not just for myself, but even where have I seen others fall short, and where have I fallen short as a practitioner for some others? Like I haven't done the job perfectly. And so I think it's always trying to create this feedback loop of like where we maybe did something not optimal and where we can continue to improve and refine going forward. And so I think it's that competitive mindset of being an athlete.
Sure.
That's so interesting. And Warren, kind of, there's loads for us to go into, but as you were speaking, so many other questions came through. And similar to Warren's point, I asked myself, like, coaches are a dime a dozen, right? Every time you open an email, there's a new coach or a new business popping up. But the great ones, you can probably count on two hands if you're lucky, I guess. To Warren's point around, did being an athlete make you a better coach? How much do you think that other awareness of the family, the agent, the innovation, managing stakeholders, seeing other people go through injuries as an athlete as well, how much do you think that goes into now how you work with the people you're working with?
Yeah, well, it's humbling, right? If you've been injured, it is the loneliest place to be. You are left behind. Everyone else, the world keeps spinning, and you're right there. It's a lonely time, and I think, and I've worked with some athletes that have never gone through that, and it's they're bulletproof, and they don't know what that feels like to be there yet. But everyone almost always goes through it at some point, and it really makes you appreciate the good times when you've been in those dark days. Those are I don't wish being hurt on anybody, but it'll gut check you really quick to see if you really want to be in this and you want to be involved. And I think especially when you see the people around you in the locker room treat you differently because you're not showing up and performing like everyone else is, you kind of go through this. Who really cares about me at this time? Who really wants to be around me? And it's unfortunately, I had a lot of that time myself. So like I see it in others when they're going through it, and I connect with them on that. And so my kind of, one of the biggest reasons I'm in this now is to help people avoid those times that I went through and kind of coach them through that and hopefully, prepare them to they don't have to do it.
So I've never been an athlete. So from my perspective, I've been in the coach's seat really throughout my whole career. But it's really interesting to hear your kind of path and your experiences with your own injury, because I've sat there because of my job in sports as kind of nutritionist, sports science. I've been there in the pits with a lot of athletes in the past, and just seeing that emotional support that you can provide to them and what that unlocks in them, and like just putting that blanket around them to say we're here to support you, it absolutely matters to them. Whereas I've seen other coaching staff who just do not give a shit. Some of the more like management or coaching staff, they just want you ready to play. Whereas the
Yeah.
performance side of things, that's where I've kind of found my greatest kind of benefits to athletes, because you're there to take them for dinner, to talk to them, to coach them, to go to their house and meet their families. And obviously, you as an athlete, you went through that, so that's why you've colored the way you are now, I guess. But it's just, yeah, great to see the parity between what you've been through and just things that I see too.
Yeah, and it makes a difference, someone like, yourself, or that role that you're speaking of, reaching out and talking to and putting your arm around somebody like, hey man, like, I get it, I'm here. Like, it's just a tough, it sucks to talk about. No one wants to go through, but the fact is that most do. And I think that the smallest comment in one day makes a big difference.
All of that insight you gave around managing your own injury and being able to advise and support players going through injury now brings to light something that Warren talks about a lot on you manage the X's and O's, you get people to lift bigger, run faster. Talk to me now about how important player availability is in a career for an athlete.
Yeah, honestly, it's everything. And the argument can be made all the time of, building the engine, building a bigger, ceiling for an athlete, and building that side of things. But most are in this position for a reason, right? Skill has shined in some sense and has been seen enough to have somebody in a position that I talk about this a lot. You're talking about longevity versus performance, essentially, but availability is always number one. If you can't play, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Nothing else. It doesn't matter how high you jump, how fast you throw the ball. None of it matters if you can't get off the bench. So that has led me to think that building a robust individual is more important than building a bigger engine. And I think, but it all comes back to, one, is there a current problem that we need to fix? And if not, okay, fine. But two, why is this individual in this position that they're in now? And is, by taking this fork in the road of building the engine versus building and bolstering resilience, which path do you need to take there is going to be answered by why is this individual here and how can we impact them further as a practitioner? But yeah, I think for most of my career, my thought has been to train for availability, train deficiencies, train weaknesses, to handle positions and scenarios that they're not strong enough in right now, because they are going to occur. It's just when. So a lot of my thought and process over a long period of time has been around that. I would say I've shifted a bit in recent years, based on what their wheelhouse is and what's keeping them in the position that they're in. And so sometimes just enhancing that ceiling and kind of building that engine is actually something that I know that they only have X amount of years left. We're just going to keep going where we're going with this and maximize it. And again, and I'm getting into the weeds a bit, but there's a cost associated with training for resiliency as opposed to training for performance, i.e. soreness levels and DOMs and performing when your body has been put in unique positions biomechanically or loaded in positions that you're not comfortable in. That's always going to cause an alarm for your system saying, I'm not comfortable here. I haven't been here, and there's going to be soreness. So it always depends on time of year and all that stuff. And again, I'm getting into the weeds, but really understanding the time of year and who you're working with and what the important piece is going to dictate whether you want to train for performance or availability.
Yeah. I mean, let's get in the weeds. Let's get into kind of performance and recovery. That's why we're here. You've worked with athletes across a bunch of different sports. You're obviously really uniquely positioned to support and lead athletes in baseball. But do you see any differences, surprising differences, or kind of like key similarities between the way athletes train and recover across sport? Is there anything that stands out?
Okay, I get asked, that's a great question. Because people, I think from the outside perspective, want to assume that training for football is so much different than training for baseball.
Yeah. Is it not?
It's not. It's not. Now it is, but it's not, right? Yeah. So most, general to specific generally is kind of the path that I'm taking of, like, there's generally for each sport, there's going to be a general prep block where we're kind of getting them back to homeostasis. We're getting them back. We're kind of improving endurance and muscular capacity and a bunch of things, and getting them back to where you can load the system again. So we're trying to fix dysfunction so that we can properly apply more load to the system. And then you're going to, move on to more intensive work where you're starting to load the system and kind of build the engine, so to speak, and enhance, what their current traits and characteristics they have. And then we're going to do that at a much faster pace. Eventually, we're going to start working on being able to do it at high velocities and explosively in chaotic environments. And then we're going to get a lot more specific to that sport or position that they exist in. And so there's a lot of general things across the board that are going to apply no matter what sport you're in. And then we're going to get into the specificity of energy system demands and what the requirements are for your sport, how long you're going full go, and then how much time you have in between plays. That all is going to be dictated and calculated into when we get more specific. And then the positions you're going to be into as well. So you're going to get specific for sure. But it's just most of the training is going to be very general across the board, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people would agree with me, but I also think that there's probably a lot of people that would debate that and call me out, but that's just been my experience, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different opinions out there, isn't there? And a lot of interestingly different pieces of literature that all show positive impact. You see it a lot in BFR, actually. There's like 30 different protocols that all work really well. It's like, which one do you actually pick? It's
Sure.
quite, yeah, it's just different opinions, really.
Yeah. And and I think the specific stuff is fun for the athlete. I think you have to find ways to make the general training process fun. Where is the intent? Where is the fun of each session? Are we seeing improvements gradually? Are we seeing them week to week? Is there education involved in how you're training from one week to the next? And what does this week do to set up the next week? Why is that important? I think so. The general process of training can be boring if it's not discussed. And I think the way that I've worked around that is that I kind of like quiz my athletes a little bit if I feel that they like to have the conversation of, why do you think we're doing this, and what do you think we're going to do next week that's different than this, and how is that going to work, and why? I like the athlete to be involved with me and feel like they're helping me, design it with them. So that's where you can get around the monotonous training a lot of times, because, to your point, Warren, of like the different BFR protocols, there's a lot of different, squatting isn't that fun to talk about, or, pulling something from the ground isn't that fun to talk about. And it's going to be pretty similar week to week. We're going to change up volumes of intensities and range of motion, et cetera. But a lot of the basics win long term, and they continue to be that way. So if I filmed everything that I trained, you'd be tired of watching me, because a lot of it's similar, but there are ways to, tweak levers on either side of the training to completely change the stimulus through a similar movement pattern. So, and that's what I've noticed, when you look at, Warren or Rich, back to your thought of like across sports differences and similarities, you see a lot more similarities and differences in movement patterns across sports, right? You're going to see certain movers, like a catcher, I've been making this comparison for a long time, but like a catcher and an offensive lineman in American football, like they have similar movement patterns. They both can move really well and squat really deep in flexion. They have great dorsiflexion. They move through similar patterns that they're comfortable in. And that's going to be different than, the same in a different position within their same sport. So across sports, you'll see more similarities through these different movement archetypes that I've kind of noticed than you see differences.
So when you have young athletes as well, right, you get them to play as many sports as possible to be well-rounded, and then you kind of specialize when you decide, I'm going to try and go to this. And then I guess from a training point of view, you bring in as much as you can, but you make sure that there's a foundation of, great S&C, nutrition is in on form. You're lifting, you're sleeping, you're doing everything else. what is interesting is that the science for performance and recovery that is changing science. Let me go back. Innovation, tools you can add in. So I guess that then becomes the differentiator. So if everyone is trying to get that solid base and you're training for longevity over specificity, I guess then as a coach, and you tell me otherwise, it's then what else do you bring in? And like for us, obviously it's Hytro and the adaptation for BFR. How have you found kind of like bringing that into the training? Is that changed stuff up because you're allowed to get a stimulus in a different way or in a different environment? How does that look?
Yeah, great question. And so you kind of mentioned it. What else can you bring in? And for me, it's what else can I kick out?
Oh, even
Like,
better. Okay.
like I'm trying to maximize by taking things away. I think more times than not. But I think that goes along with my general thought on it, and you kind of alluded to it of like, if it doesn't fit in what I'm already doing, there's just not a chance I'm going to add it. And because there's multiple reasons for that. One, I don't like adding a ton of things to my process and making the process long, because ultimately my main goal is buy-in from the athlete. And if I'm asking them to do something new all the time and add time to their day, that's annoying.
Yeah.
Like, Buck, you're 2 strikes, man. You're almost out. You asked me to do one more thing, I'm out.
Yeah.
So, I always try and less is more, better is better. But ultimately, how can we do something that we like doing and we've been doing with success, but then can we magnify it by adding something to it? And that's one thing. You mentioned the BFR and Hytro. That's something that I've been doing. And so, particularly for my baseball client right now, and we did this just a couple hours ago. So on like a day like today, I kind of take the old Cal Dietz model of like, I do a high-low model with my athletes. And that's just playing to the neural demand and capacity to really push hard and get an adaptation on certain days, and to pull back on other days to really allow for the next big push. Essentially, we only got so much bandwidth. We got to judge when we want to crank up the engines and when we want to really kind of push, aerobic output and capacity and restoration to prepare for the next one. So today, Cal Dietz always did this with collegiate athletes, which makes a ton of sense when they're binge drinking all weekend, that like Monday is not the day for max effort. It just isn't. No one told me that when I got drafted, but anyways, so like Monday's like usually my low day. Okay, we're getting into the week. We're gonna push some aerobic capacity work. We're gonna do some upper body work. We're gonna throw. We're gonna do some skill work. And so, with my baseball guy this morning, on days that we do our lower demand days, where we do some extensive tempo work and some conditioning work and some upper body work, we actually will do passively BFR in our warm up. And so what we've noticed from that is, I know my guy that he's got probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 things he likes to do for his upper body to prepare to throw. So these are just basic movements. It could be overhead med ball against the wall for a second, right? It could be some T-spine work. It could be some forearm prep, right? He's got his, and this is what you know about baseball guys, is they have their things. That if a comet was flying towards Earth, they would still get these reps in before it came. Like, it's just, they're not going to miss it, right? That's how we are. And so he's going to do these things, but I know that, I guess, you could call it the ISP, right? Or ischemic preconditioning, or activation, where we can do the same things that we're doing, and we can minimize that blood flow, and then we can get more of that surge there to get more of the, in my opinion, a lot of the pain relief and things that we're already going through, but just a lot more viscous property into the muscles before we have a demand of throwing. So that is one thing that we do on our low days that I just did earlier today. So we can take something that we already do, and now we're just going to add BFR to it. We'll do similar things on our Tuesday, our second day of the week, but we'll use shorts, and we'll prep the lower half and activate with the shorts on. And then that is our high speed sprint day. That is our, intensified training session of lower body output. That is our CMJ day. That is the day that I need him clicking on all cylinders so that the bar is high enough that we can push for an adaptation. And I know that, and I've already done this in the past. We've compared days without BFR to days with BFR, and we're getting a little bit more output on the CMJ. That was enough. That was enough for me or for my athlete to say, we'll keep doing this, right? So there had to be something for him. It doesn't have to be. We can educate about it, but ultimately, if I feel better and or I see higher outputs, then it's not even a question. That though it's going to be on before I'm even in the room. So those are some things that I like to add into the current process. Again, I'm not adding, I'm just adding the shorts or the top to what we're doing.
I'm gonna put one on the spot here, and I'd like, first of all, I think I'm gonna steal that now about taking things away, right? Because the best exercise is the one that gets done, right? Not the one that's most fancy. And I can absolutely see where, even though they're elite full-time pro athletes, there's some are time poor, maybe. Warren, you talk a lot at the moment about what we're seeing and hearing back around plus BFR. So what existing behaviors are there that you plus BFR to get greater output of the time you were going to spend in that training, in that recovery anyway? Can you talk a little bit about just what you're seeing and stuff that you're finding interesting around there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the crucial point that Brian made was buy-in from an athlete.
Sure.
So whenever you apply anything in an athletic setting, if they're not going to buy, as he just said, right, the best exercise is the one that's done, right, at the end of the day. So to have a technique that can be added to something without additional time, that an athlete can feel viscerally, they actually experience what's happening with BFR. There's a feedback loop going on, and it's taking no additional time. So it's quite likely that they're going to have a positive experience based on the evidence that we already have. And therefore, we know, well, there's no additional time. They're probably experiencing something positive. There's a higher likelihood of buy-in versus something else that might not be as visceral. So you consume a protein shake or consume creatine even. We know they work. There's a lot of scientific evidence behind them, but you can't feel them immediately. There's no kind of snap the fingers and you can feel it working. With BFR, you almost can. So I think driving that buy-in is incredibly important. And that's what we're seeing in professional teams now. We're seeing the buy-in for the technique of BFR, particularly with Hytro, because it's so easy to administer, is way beyond anything I saw while working in team settings, insofar as things like ice baths or recovery boots or dry needling or massage. There's a place for all of them. There's evidence behind all of them, but the buy-in might be 40% of athletes, 60%, 30%, depending on the team. For BFR with Hytro, we're seeing an incredible high buy-in. And I think it's just because it's easy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's got to be easy. It's got to fit into what we're already doing. And that makes it, easy to get a lot of reps in and not just like, hey, once a month, we're going to do this. This is a part of what we do weekly. This is a part of our week and we're going to do it. So, yeah, that's, and I don't ask athletes to do it without me doing it beforehand. I've done quite a bit of this. I've spent a lot of time in hotels. You're not going to get a lot of load at hotels that you stay at to train with. So there's ways to optimize, right? So, and I've just noticed myself just a lot of the pains and stuff that I'll wake up with or soreness from traveling. That's dissipated quickly post BFR and able to kind of get into more things I want to do in the day. And I've had the same feedback from the athletes that I've been working with.
I'm going to take you back to one of the comments you made at the start. And I'm conscious you're a very young man, but when you were a younger athlete, there said things you wish you had learned, ways to manage volume, that type of thing. Where do you think the understanding or the behavior has changed the most? The understanding and behavior of the athlete attacking their training, or the understanding and behavior of the coaches managing that and giving them the right tools and introducing things like BFR? Like, where's been the biggest shift?
Well, like team no sleep is dead. That's like my favorite thing of like kind of this new era is like the just grind and push as hard as you can because you're cooler than everybody else is like, that's done.
It's dumb.
And young kids, that can be something to go after. That can be a badge of honor of like, I do more than everybody else and I train more. So, it's obviously shifted to, how those that recover better get the better adaptation. Not more is not more, better is better. It's just doing well for your body and setting your body up to, elicit an adaptation, is hard to understand as a young athlete, that not crawling out of the gym is actually going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to learn that. Now, I give younger guys, I say kids, I give young guys credit when they listen to me and hear me out when they're 21, 22, when I have that conversation. Or like I shut down the session and they're like, that's it. And it's like, yep, that's it. So that all has to be education, and it has to be coming from a place of understanding of, here's why we're doing it. And if I get max and 10 on these reps, that's it. That is it. We're shutting it. And that's why I do like some technologies, like, VBT, for example, right? When things start slowing down, we're done here. That's it. We're not going to set a new record because we're not going to get there. Something's going to go south before it improves. So I like anything that can help us be aware when the adaptation that we're chasing, that window is gone and it's time to shut it down. And now it's time to kick into parasympathetic. It is time to rest and recover. It's time to grow those tissues. It's time to adapt and fight another day. And the younger that guys understand this, the more success that they're going to have and the higher that ceiling is going to be, ultimately.
Yeah.
I think we're all culpable of that, right? When you're in the gym as a kid, 1 RMs every session. You're just trying to hammer them out. But it's just a thing of time and experience and time in the game, really. And you're passing that back to the younger generation. So, yeah, great.
Yeah. Look, Warren and Rich, I know too. Like, you have a day, you get the right single origin in you. You can go rip something up and have a day in the gym and think you want to keep going. But ultimately, something's going to come back and humble you. I mean, that's just the way it goes. I am still guilty of it to this day. I will do it. But, and that's where it helps to have somebody with you that can help, hey, shut it down, because that's just who we are. It's just this primal thing to just keep going and keep working because, that's what you want to do. And so I think the better we understand to listen to our body and shut things down, ultimately it's just better.
So, Brian, have you used BFR for recovery specifically with your athletes? We talked a lot about preparing and pre-activation, but we're talking now about kind of, shutting down the system and getting recovery. And is that something you've explored?
Yeah. So that's actually where I started with it. And I did that more frequently. And I've just recently gone on to the IPC, where the whole pre-training piece, I've seen a lot more, I've seen a lot of the magic come from that side, and I've been obsessed with that piece of it lately, but I still do the recovery side. So to answer your question, that was where I started a lot more, and I was incorporating it more on, I kind of talked on that high-low programming. It was really kind of a midweek day of movement therapy and BFR, and some of that being, yes, active, and some of it being passive. So it was usually followed by a sauna session where it would be passively done. And I knew that we were still going to get that, mechanism to be involved in how we could push recovery faster. And so again, stacking it was something that we were already doing. And if it's sauna time, it's sauna time. I'm not adding time to their day.
Yeah.
And so that's still how I like to use it. And when I have athletes that do have it at their house and have saunas at their house, that's a piece of their mainstay. But yeah, it's really since I've gotten more on the pre-training side that has become more of a daily thing, that I've been more obsessive on that, to be honest with you.
Do you know what? It makes a lot of sense to me as well, because recovery is it's very subjective, right? It's how do you feel typically? And it's really difficult to measure objectively recovery, because there's probably 6 different layers. You've done an ice bath, massage, cryo, BFR. Which one has had the greatest impact? We don't know. Whereas when you're doing something pre-training, it's quite objective. You're going to do a CMJ and look at the neuromuscular function. You're going to look at the impulse on the deck. So you can see immediately what's happening. You can see the analgesia kicking. So okay, it's kind of rewarding, I guess, because you see the data, whereas recovery, it's a little bit more difficult and nuanced.
100%. And that is hard. So it is hard to identify exactly what the reason is for feeling better or not feeling as good. That's tough. Now, do we know it works? And again, guys of routine, females of routine, whatever it is, they're going to do what they're going to do because it's in their mind. It's on their to-do list. They are going to run through that, almost like obsessively. I've noticed. And I'm the same way. If I have a day set up for that, I'm knocking out the whole list. We're going to do all of it. But yeah, it is harder to put a finger on what it is that led to that. I think a lot of young baseball players that I've worked with, they have a hard time keeping the low enough and the high enough. And so like by what I mean by that is on a recovery day, they'll go throw a bullpen, and they think that's light. They don't think about the power and velocity involved in that and the high speeds that the body is moving and the ligamental stress, or ligamentous stress involved on that. But they'll still call it a low recovery day.
Yeah.
But the coffee and the dip they had on the way to throw and everything else that they just got amped up to do, they reached into a level that's kind of like cutting into that, that ultimately like that recovery day by still getting in that middle zone of adding more volume and fatigue to the system, but they don't see it that way because it wasn't in the weight room.
Yeah.
So that's where I see a lot of guys kind of struggle with is still mixing in, and they just can't really keep it low when they need to keep it low, and they still mix in some things that kind of cut into the way of ultimately the body kind of repairing and adapting. And that's a whole conversation to have there.
I guess one of the things that athletes get the benefit of when they work with you is you know them really intimately and you can kind of like dial up things here and there to get the end result. Knowing everything you do and talking there about managing load, and when you're in season, I mean, the volume of games for baseball is ridiculous. How would you now go about describing like the ideal I guess not even recovery week because you're looking at back-to-back games at times. How do you get these guys over the course of a week of games? How do you prescribe recovery? And, is it BFR that you get to drop in, or what else are you asking these guys to do to stay fresh for back-to-back games?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it'll differ a little bit between a pitcher and a position player, right? The pitchers, he's got his kind of routine. Unless he's out of the bullpen, those guys can be called in any day to go throw. Whereas your starting pitcher, they know the day they're throwing and they know their routine in between. And then you're dealing with the position players that are asked to go every day. And that's a little bit harder. And that's just where there's got to be habits in there, a part of their day where they are unwinding. They are kind of letting go. They are not on devices or on their phone, and they are letting themselves actually relax, because that's a chronic stressor, that blue screen in your face all the time. No one talks about that, but it is. The texts and the notifications that we're getting, they all kind of promote, this anxiousness or, whatever it is, dopamine kicks, whatever it is. And so it's finding these times in the day, particularly early on, where you can get away from that and really let your body kind of actually relax and not think about everything else. So you got to work those in. But that being said, again, there are ways to, again, kind of get this recovery aspect or feel like you're winding down a bit, even between the ups and downs of the day. There are areas that you can hit it as a position player. I do like a good post-game routine wind down. That is essential to, you've just been on a, norepinephrine and adrenaline rush for 3.5 hours, sometimes 4 hours at times, that you're up and down with the emotions of the game, your strikeouts, your home runs, you just cleared benches and went and you were about to fight the other team, whatever it is. That's why I love the game, by the way. That's just such a fun thing to deal with. But ultimately, you got to come back. You got to come back, and you can't always have the foot on the gas. So there's got to be planned parts of your day to unwind. And again, mixed in with what your routine is. Even position players today, this is different than when I played. Position players today will have arm care routines. Almost all of them have arm care routines now. This was not common 10 years ago. So that's a good thing. So with arm care routines, how can we maximize? You know, we talked earlier about whether it's prepping for a game or activating more of that IPC, or whether it's kind of this passive recovery. Okay, after the game, you're hitting the sauna and you did the hot tub. Okay, you had it on passively then. So these are all worked into the, you know, everyone's routine currently.
Okay, really interesting. Right, but based on that as well, have you heard about the synergy with nutrition and BFR and the use of
I
BFR?
have.
Yeah, is that from myself or from others? But just to be clear.
I believe I heard it from somebody else as well, and I'm trying to think of who it was, but it's super intriguing to me. We're always going to be a step ahead of the defined research. We know that, but in theory, it makes a ton of sense to me, of how we time that, and really kind of, again, optimize something we're already doing to have a lot more of an impact.
Yeah, I think so there is actually a piece of research published like 5 years ago looking at glucose uptake into the limb enhanced with BFR, which is obviously really promising for glycogen resynthesis post competition. But my hypothesis and research we're doing, and we will be doing, hopefully with Manchester Met Uni, is we're looking at amino acids assimilation. So driving in not just glucose, but also proteins into the tissue. And the real simple takeaway is nail a recovery shake and do some BFR. It's really simple. And then if you can anchor those two things together and also explain to your athlete, you know that feeling when you unstrap? It's like that hot cold sensation, that relieving sensation. Well, that's your protein shake being driven into your tissues. And they're like, oh, I felt that happen. Okay. And now you've anchored a behavior. And every time they have a recovery shake, guess what? They want to do BFR because they felt it working. So I've had some really great success using that existing literature, hypothesizing, going away to do the research, and then delivering that to athletes. And now we've got this real powerful kind of feedback loop.
I think it's great. I want more to come out on this, because it again would drive more of that habit stacking, doing things at the same time, and really optimizing something, you know, kind of the bioavailability or how much is pushed into the muscles and the actual impact of it. I think it's huge. So
You can also take it into collagen. So if you have, I don't know, if you have an AC tear or something in your shoulder from over rotation from a throw, and you're rehabbing that shoulder and you're doing some arm care, well, you can have collagen shots and do BFR. And again, the hypothesis states that maybe we can drive that more effectively into tissues to recover it quicker. Again, hold my hands up. We need to do the research, but it all lends itself and makes sense scientifically.
yeah, you know, I think it makes perfect sense. I would love to see more come out on it. I would love to hear more ideas like that, and just, you know, get after it more and start doing it more. But just in theory, the whole thought behind it makes perfect sense to me.
Oh, believe me, there's more ideas like that, but not for today. Another podcast.
On that point, I think what like we'll probably close out soon, but just a couple of questions I have left. One is, I think it's good as a brand as Hytro, and as what we believe, pioneering thought leadership on the adoption of BFR. I think it's really important for people to kind of do stuff not haphazardly, but try it and see what happens, because that's going to be the only way to learn, right? I mean, does that resonate with you as a coach and as an athlete? Is that the same approach you kind of take?
Yeah, there's always got to be, you know, almost everything you're doing is going to be, you know, driven and you know, to some extent, something that's been proven and that you've had success doing. And then there's got to be a small percentage of what you do that is exploratory.
Right.
I've always believed that. You know, I've done a lot of it in the past of kind of messing with things, and it's usually myself. But if I've done something enough on myself and someone else does it, I'll have someone else do it too. And so I'll pass it along. But like, there's always got to be some exploring. That's part of the fun of this field, is like, we're always learning more. And most of what people talked about years and years ago are now coming out in the research of, yes, this is exactly it. So it's something we have to be doing to push the field forward, in my opinion.
I think, Rich, it's important to note, though, that the best practitioners will base it on existing research and forward think future hypotheses based on existing literature, typically, because, oh, well, there may be few that have, random ideas that come out of the blue as well that we need to test. But typically that was a great study that happened. What else could we do to progress this further? And how do I apply that with my athletes? Let's look at that. Let's research that. It's typically what you see.
Yeah, more about extrapolating ideas or taking it from a lab-based environment to a practical, like, field-based environment type thing.
Any
Right?
of the above is just being an open mind. If you understand the fundamental science underpinning something, you can then apply it in different ways that people haven't
Yeah.
thought about because you get it. But you
Yeah.
need to first understand the science, and then you can do that.
Yeah.
So, Brian, then, if I could ask you, specifically around this use of BFR that you're helping Hytro learn more about, especially in the adoption with baseball, but wider. What advice would you give a early stage coach thinking about introducing BFR, whether it be as a prehab, part of the warm up, or as recovery? Kind of like, what are the kind of like key points for them to keep in mind on how to successfully implement it with athletes?
Yeah, I think to successfully implement it, there's got to be, again, a way to do it easily. And that's obviously why, Hytro is important to us, is something that can be done at scale, right? So with coaches, it's hard if something is only done, on N=1 and you got one person and you're tied up, and that takes some supervision. So that's always the hard part. But if it's something that can be done at scale, I think in theory, understanding these best practices and why, and the mechanisms, to what Warren said, why certain things work and the science behind it, implementing things at scale when there's that understanding is something that's easy to do. But I think it's just picking your times, not trying to involve it in everything that you do right out of the gates. Hey, 5-6 days a week we're doing this, unless of course it makes sense, but baby steps with implementation of new things. I've done this with CMJ over time. You can only ask so many times a week to get a CMJ. You can only ask so many times a week to get strapped up against your will and do a BFR protocol. But ultimately, again, everything comes from the education. And so if you're going to be asking an individual to do something, there's got to be a good education or why behind it. And I think when people understand the why, they're a lot more, opt to take in these habits and create these habits for themselves, and even without being told to do so. So that's my thoughts behind that. And my recommendation is to, one, if you explain the why well enough up front, then it's going to be easy to get adoption and adherence. But two, start small with it and dose it here and there. And then when that response is understood and they understand the difference between doing it and not doing it, that's really where it makes things easier going forward and being more fluid.
I could add on that, Rich, as well. It's taking the athlete on the journey. So I gave an example earlier of explaining to them what they were feeling and then associating it with some of the science, and then they can actually visualize and get a visceral experience with it. Whether they like it or not will then determine whether there's buy-in, but that's how I have driven some quite good successful BFR protocols in teams, as an example.
Brian, there's one question that we love to ask people when they come on the pod, and we'll close out with this one. And I think you'll be uniquely placed to answer it, having been on the receiving end of coaching as an athlete and now, leading your field with your coaching. But in your mind, what is the difference between a good and a great coach?
Oh, the difference between, well, look at it this way. The difference, and this is how I've looked at it, because I've tried to fill this void as a coach. And this is what somebody said to me a long time ago. And it was, be the coach that you wish you would have had at 16. And so the great coaches, in my opinion, are the ones that understand how to relate and educate and get adoption and get them and maximize your potential. Those are the ones that I remember. Those are the great coaches. The ones that come up, I have a coach in my life that is almost like a father to me at this point. He was my college baseball coach. He knew how to get the most out of me. He knew I didn't respond well to getting grilled and yelled at. He knew who I was, and he also knew my talent. And he told me one day, he said, if you go 0 for 4 every day this week, you're still starting leadoff next week. I don't care. You just do you. So he took the pressure off me to perform, and that's what got the best of me. So that's just an example but it's the coaches that can get that out of somebody that is the great coach.
That's awesome. I mean, we learn so much speaking to so many different athletes and coaches. It's really exciting to see where hopefully as a brand and a product, we can only further what the guys are doing. I know you're really busy, so I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna say thank you so much for your time, and Warren, I know you're literally mid hopping country. That's just Hytro life. But it is. I mean, I think the listeners have learned a ton around the approach for BFR, some interesting stuff we wouldn't have thought of going between baseball and other sports. And hopefully you can continue, Brian, to help us adapt and get better at how we're introducing Hytro for baseball and other sports. It's been awesome. Again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you being honest and giving us all that insight.
Yeah, thank you both. It's been a blast. We'll have to do it again.
Nice one.
Yeah, echo. It's been awesome, man. Thanks for coming on.
Of course.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.